Good morning, everyone. This is Lori Peak, and I serve as the principal investigator for the CONVERGE facility at the Natural Hazard Center at the University of Colorado Boulder. It is my pleasure to welcome you this morning to the CONVERGE virtual forum dedicated to university interventions after disasters, lessons from Puerto Rico. This virtual forum this morning is a follow-on from the January meeting that we held with members of the Social Science Extreme Events Research Network, where several locally affected researchers, as well as researchers with ongoing projects on the island, shared about their research and efforts in Puerto Rico, both after Hurricane Maria, as well as following the recent series of earthquakes that have affected the island and continue to disrupt so many thousands of lives there. Welcome everyone to this conversation today. The purpose of today's virtual forum is to focus specifically on the role that universities may play in the aftermath of disasters. We know that after disasters occur, that universities are often eager to assist impacted areas and impacted people through a variety of means, including service learning trips, as well as providing aid and resources, as well as launching quick response and other long-term research investigations. When well coordinated and rooted in local needs, we know that these post-disaster interventions can positively inform response and recovery efforts. Sometimes, however, when these efforts are ad hoc and ephemeral, they can negatively affect communities already damaged by catastrophe. Thus, the purpose of this forum today is to feature 4 researchers who were on the ground after the earthquakes that recently shook Puerto Rico. Each of the 4 presenters will reflect on the ethical and practical implications of their interventions. And then at the end of the discussion, they will leave time for lessons learned and recommendation, as well as time for question and answer around this broader inquiry into how to balance academic demands and expectations with the survival needs of communities that have experienced collective and cumulative trauma. Today, we're going to hear from 4 panelists, and I want to acknowledge that Cecilia Ortiz Garcia and Marla Perez Lugo, who helped to organize this virtual forum, are on an airplane right now, and so they're going to be watching the video later when we post that. But for now, we're going to be joined by Jacob Mans, who's an assistant professor of architecture at the University of Minnesota, Kim Connolly, who's a professor of law at the University of New York at Buffalo, Amy Nitza, who's a professor of psychology at University of New York at New Paltz, and Jorge Gonzalez Cruz, who's a professor of civil engineering at the City University of New York. Each of our 4 esteemed presenters will speak for about 12 minutes or so about their research and interventions in Puerto Rico, as well as sharing some of the lessons that they have learned. And then with our remaining time, they will both have time to respond to one another, but also we hope to respond to your questions. If you do have questions or comments that emerge during the forum today, we hope that you will please use either the Q&A box or the chat box that can be found on your Zoom application. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Jacob Mans. Jacob, would you like to kick off the forum and begin sharing your slides? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you, Lori, for that introduction. My name is Jacob Mans. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota within the College of Design and specifically within the School of Architecture. I've been doing work in Puerto Rico for a few years, kind of stemming off from a collaborative connection that I made with Marla and Cecilio. And coming out of that relationship, the University of Minnesota has been developing a course that I would like to talk about, a course that actually had me down in Puerto Rico this January when the earthquakes were occurring and the major earthquake hit Puerto Rico. And that course is the University of Minnesota Global Convergence Lab. So in the next in 10 minutes or so, I just want to talk about a few key points that I think are really important just coming out of this last trip that we took. One is obviously, and I think a lot of us already know this, but the importance of local partners. And for us on this trip, it's primarily, working a lot with the RISE network, which stands for Resilience Through Innovation and Sustainable Energy, as well as NESI, the National Institute for Island Sustainability and Energy. And then also the role of extended peer networks in this work. So not only, the networks that you have through partners, in Puerto Rico, but what are the networks that you and your home institution can bring to these conversations? This last trip, we had a few really important connections that really helped us, I think, operate in an effective way after the earthquakes in Puerto Rico. Another thing I want to talk about is the importance of planning in nimbleness into travel. The Global Convergence class at the University of Minnesota is, it's a student learning trip. It's interdisciplinary. It's got research students from both the Humphrey Institute of Public Policy, as well as from the College of Design, Architecture, Landscape Architecture, and other design disciplines. So how do you manage the expectations of students who are looking to do very specific work, but yet be nimble and able to respond to, place-specific circumstances that definitely affect the ethics of doing research. And then thinking a little bit about preparedness, and I can definitely say that after this last trip, I'm thinking about that quite a bit differently. Not only physical preparedness in terms of making sure that you have supplies and that you've established the right itinerary for your trip, but also mental preparedness, and making sure that you have tools to deal with stress and strain of students, faculty, as well as those that you're working with. So a lot of the content that I'm going to be sharing, you can look at in more detail. The course puts together a pretty nice blog, which you can access at uminconvergencepuertorico.org. We have the last couple of years worth of trips up there. And I'm going to be showing a few photos from the blog, but you can go on and look at and read in more detail what we were actually up to. So the first thing I want to talk about is the importance of local partners. For us at the University of Minnesota, doing work in Puerto Rico, it was important to get a long-term commitment from our university to make sure that we're not just going into environments, doing some very short-term research and then end up disrupting the long-term communities that we're trying to plan with. So the image that I'm showing here is a picture of Marcel Castro Citoriche from the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, who's one of many faculty and UPR students who met with us and our group this year when we were traveling down to Puerto Rico. I just think it's really important not only to have the expertise that your own institution is bringing down, in our case, looking at resiliency, but then also making sure that you're pairing whatever questions you're asking with, local experts, and you're finding venues not only to engage with them, but making sure that your students kind of acknowledge the role of the local expert in doing this. This photograph was actually taken, I believe, the same day that the earthquake struck. So we're at a house in Mayagüez, right next to where Marcel lived. We had a number of local students come in and talk with us that day. This is actually Marla and Cecilio's house. It's kind of become the RISE house for students who are going down and traveling and doing work in this area of Puerto Rico. But having that really kind of strong on the ground community connection with students, academics, and professionals was just incredibly critical from both, I think, a research standpoint and making sure that you're understanding whatever information you're gathering from a local perspective. But also, in the case of the earthquakes this year, we were not going down after the earthquakes. We were down there and affected by the earthquakes. And having these local voices helping to contextualize that for us, I think helped us manage our own our stress levels and provided us a lot of really valuable guidance in terms of how we should operate moving forward. So this is another blog post. This is just an image of a solar trailer. This maybe ties into another point that I wanted to make, which is about being nimble, but this is mostly about the idea of extended networks and what does your institution bring to these contexts. So the little banner that you can't see very well on the back of the trailer there says footprintproject.org. The Footprint Project is actually a nonprofit in Minnesota who's been doing work in Puerto Rico for a number of years, and who we've been partnering with, back in Minneapolis when we're continuing these conversations. And for us, we were able to, once we got to Puerto Rico and the earthquake struck, not only leverage, the local contacts and the kind of information that we were receiving from the RISE network and from ANESI, but then also kind of add to that conversation and connect those individuals up with, in this case, the Footprint Project, who was tied into a stream of NGOs. There was a pretty good thread going on with different NGOs trying to allocate and distribute resources across Puerto Rico. And we were able to, make connections between what our partners from ANESI and RISE and UPRM were saying, and help, tell the NGOs, what we were hearing from our contacts. So it was just, I think the earthquake struck, we understood that our research project was going to change. We weren't going to be able to go and, interview and collect information in the same way from communities as we had planned on, 3 or 4 days, prior to the event. So having both the really strong local network in place and having worked with them for several years and establishing that trust, and also tapping into our kind of own network that we were bringing down from NGOs who are in Puerto Rico from Minnesota, allowed us to shift gears towards kind of effectively helping respond directly after the earthquake, which I think was really important. Otherwise, we would have ended up kind of not understanding where to go, wandering into places where you become you're just sort of extracting additional resources from people who already don't have resources. So it became a really effective kind of collection of connections to help us operate effectively after the events. And then kind of building on some of this idea of being nimble, I think, for the University of Minnesota, for the School of Architecture and the College of Design, we don't have a specific program that's looking at community resilience. We're a professional program. We're training students to become, licensed in a profession. So it's really important that we begin to establish additional programming at our own institution to prepare students in advance for the kinds of conversations that they'll be having in a specific local context. So we've been working really hard for the last few years to program different workshops with Marla and Cecilio and the RISE network, and kind of tap into that network and bring it to other conversations that we're actually having in Minnesota. A couple of workshops that we've been doing for the last 2 springs are really focusing in on the role of design and helping build community resilience, and trying to take the best practices that are being put forward through the RISE network and apply them to our own projects in Minnesota. And in that way, I think the idea of preparedness, it goes beyond, whatever assets you're bringing. It's about establishing a frame of mind for students in general, a way of thinking about these kinds of issues that stretches their idea of what their profession can do, and I think makes them more flexible and resilient once they actually, in this case, came into a disaster event following the earthquakes. So I want to just share a little bit about our Global Convergence Lab and what we're trying to do and how it actually facilitates some of those points that I was trying to outline. I mean, right now, the Global Convergence Lab is working in Puerto Rico. We see it as a set of relationships that we're trying to establish between ourselves in Minnesota and our partners at UPR. We're really trying to leverage not only those academic connections, but also look at local government connections. Our students, we found, have made some really fantastic relationships. Students who were engaged in the program a couple of years ago have now moved on to interesting positions and are able to come back and help contribute as well. I mentioned before the connection between NGOs. We do a lot of work with NGOs in Puerto Rico, and we're trying to create connections between NGOs in Puerto Rico and NGOs in Minnesota who would like to do work in Puerto Rico, and that we found have been has been pretty effective. But in the end, it's really making sure that we have this connection and these relationships in place, so that when we go down and we do the work that we want to do, it is resilient. You know, I think if we wouldn't have had the connections that we had through RISE, through Marlon Cecilio, through Anesi, and all the key leaders there, you know, we very well could have been in Mayaguez, you know, experienced the earthquake, lost power, lost water, and then, you know, just sort of been a burden on the community. Immediately following the the earthquakes, we got a call from our travel insurance partners saying if we wanted to kind of pull out, if that's what we thought was the most ethical thing to do, which was just to leave. And in the end, our entire group decided that it would make sense to stay because of these connections we had, and because we felt that we could actually operate effectively and help the situation as opposed to hurt it. So I'm gonna close it up here, but just again, before I do, for me, this experience has really shown me the importance of local partners. In our case, it's the establishment and working with these two major organizations, RISE and Anesi, the value and the importance of not only leveraging your local partners, but making sure that you're creating connections where you can and bringing in networks to build on this partnership and to build on the resiliency of this network. Being nimble, making sure that you've embedded into your programming and train students ahead of time to be able to switch from a research mode into a response mode, because in our case, we went from a research project, you know, and in an instant, we had to kind of shift into a response project. And then lastly, preparedness, both physical programming as well as building in mental preparedness. And I think that happens through ongoing programming at your own institution, as well as, you know, handling yourself and having deep conversations when you're on the ground. So I will leave it with that, and I will hand it back over to Kim, I believe, is next.
Thank you very much. What a wonderful program you continue to build. It's really inspiring to keep hearing this. So I am pulling up what I hope will be shared. Is that sharing right now? There we go. Good morning, everyone. It is indeed an honor to be here and to get to share a little bit of what we've done here in through Buffalo and in Puerto Rico. We're going to be talking about teaching and serving through and after disasters in Puerto Rico and beyond. I want to start with a little history of what we call UBLawResponds. And what happened is I've been a clinical teacher, which is in the law school setting, where students are admitted to practice law and do supervised legal work in their second and third years of law school. And when Hurricane Maria hit, I realized that we might be able to provide some help from Buffalo if I could find resources to get students there, because as fabulous as the law schools were and are in Puerto Rico, more bandwidth is better when you're facing the kinds of disasters that both happened with Maria and are happening now with the earthquake. So I got the support of my, then at that point, very new dean, who was very supportive of my raising money. And we embarked on our first trip. And our first trip was, at that point, I thought, going to be our only trip. We were going to make a trip, we were going to help, and we were going to leave. And now I just got back in January from our fifth trip. So we are clearly bonded, and that is in part because of the RISE network. One of the things that we do with the law students is we work both, if you look on this, on the left-hand side, you can see we're doing delivery of supplies and materials and on the ground humanitarian work, in addition to the work that we do in the legal field. So this is a picture of my students at the court with the Chief Justice, who also came and was our commencement speaker at the law school last year because of the relationships that we have built through UBLawResponds. What happens with our students is, this is service learning on legal and policy work, but it's on steroids to be bringing this to Puerto Rico. And so were a number of law schools that have sent students there. There's no law school that has been as many times, and there's no law school that has created as intense coursework as we've created. Our students who go have a 6-credit course affiliated with their trip. They spend time in preparation in advance, and I'm going to talk about how important that is in just a minute. They spend time on the ground doing work based on their advanced preparations and doing some research to then do work when they return. So it's a wraparound experience that has service in the middle. During the first trip that we took there, the gentleman who is in the student attorney who is in the middle biggest shot, who is from Puerto Rico. Who's from Puerto Rico. Oops. Something happened, I'm sorry. I'm trying to go back to this. It's, sorry, I moved to a different thing. So, so the gentleman who's in that middle, he talked with one of his friends and said, I have this really cool professor who is in Mayaguez, and we are going to be looking at some really interesting stuff. And so so it turns out to be Cecilio. So Cecilio came and shared. Is my thing still showing? Sharing is paused. Please bring your shared window to the front. Just a second, please. I'm not sure what's going on with my
Yeah, Kim, I think if you can just put it back in slide. There we go. It looks great.
Sorry.
Thank
I'm
you.
not sure what happened. Okay. So the chat box got in the middle. So the gentleman in the middle, he about to hold on to the coffee cup. He and his high school friend said, "We have cool professors. We should need to get them together." So I met Cecilio, and we suddenly realized that some of what we were sharing was really important, and so we continued this work. Cecilio and Marla came to our conference that we had celebrating that first trip, and a service learning experience was born that became really important. And so what's happened with this is it creates this whole new framework for us, because it's very different than the courses that I teach typically in the law school clinic, where I get to plan and prepare in advance. Everything is changing daily. It was changing daily down in our first trip when there were days with no water, when there were changes in our itinerary, when there were changes in the needs. We had planned to be doing one thing, and then our partners on the ground said, no, that's not the kind of law we need. We need a different kind of law, so please learn that and come do that. And we did that the week before. It changed with my conception of how I needed to prepare students. It's very important that students be prepared to deal with trauma-informed lawyering. Our social work school has been incredibly important in making sure that our students are prepared for that. I have learned so much from our partners about doing real and deep cultural competence to avoid the concept of coming in and knowing best, to avoid the concept of coming in and being able to be of true service, and to figure out how to work with stakeholders. That is something that has brought me back for these 5 trips with students, to be able to make sure that we provide helpful help in the short period of time that we're on the ground, and add the bandwidth while we're here. One of the things that's been very important to me is figuring out how to truly care for student attorneys. I actually just want to say that I thought I'd gotten pretty good at that. We'd had the first trip where I learned a lot and then talked a lot with people and experts in the RISE network. And then I went back 4 times. And this 5th, the time that we went back in January, similar to Jacob, we were in a situation where we were experiencing the earthquakes while they were happening. we went into a meeting at a law school clinic where the first thing we were shown after being greeted warmly was the exit, because earthquakes were actively happening. And so being able to truly care for the student attorneys during the work is a work in progress for me too, because I had been in the aftermath of Maria until the earthquakes. And then pivoting to be able to figure out how to best help the student attorneys appropriately process work. I've done that for years with student attorneys. However, every new set of student attorneys needs new thinking about. And so making sure that we are able to work well with clients, well with our partners, well with our stakeholders, means making sure that our anxiety, that our newness, that our levels of increasing cultural competence work every single time with the new set of students that I have. Basically it's adaptive ecosystem management, and making sure we're connected and in sync with those we hope to serve. Things we thought we had a very set plan for the trip in January, and everything switched up because people were actively dealing with earthquake responses. And so being sure to be able to do that is something that we do. We do have, similar to Jacob's, we have a blog. This is a trip of one, but I will see if I can hot link you to our blog just very briefly. You can go there and enjoy it later. But we have, so all the students wrote blogs, and I love the January 29th blog, Resiliency is the Governance of Uncertainty. That's actually a quote that one of my students grabbed from a video of Cecilia, who's not able to be here. And then there's various ways that the students reflect and having chances that they have to work with this kind of stuff. So that's just an example of what really worked well for us, and helping students process and helping people watch is an important part of having this blog. I don't want to take much more time because I know we've got other people who really want to share, but I do want to talk about what I'm thinking about as we consider our next steps. My dean, our university, SUNY's commitment to Puerto Rico continues. And so our RISE network and other allies have realized we need to continue our work. As you can see, there's a picture of me and students in a different service setting. Our university's saying is, here is how. And so all of the students write and staff write about this. So I'm saying, here's how student attorneys generate policy options that can change lives. In part, they do that by being there. In part, they do that by reflecting and working from home. We recognize strongly that our resiliency work that we do from our expert space in Buffalo, where the earth is not shaking and we do have running water. My last trip, I actually went back in February, and there was a time that I didn't have for a whole day in my space running water. We really need to know from our space here that we're not replacing local bandwidth and expertise. And so we're making sure that the connections that we make through the RISE network, through an essay, through work like this, and the connections that happen in sharing in these types of settings must be interwoven and honored as we go forward. Puerto Rico is no longer as visually present as when Maria hit, and so securing further support to ensure that this student service learning, both creating sensitive future lawyers as well as creating opportunities to expand bandwidth for policy and legal work that are needed in Puerto Rico, we have to secure further support. And then emerging realities need to be considered. I just want to throw in there that I did get a call already from across campus to see if I was really actually planning to take students this summer, and because of the COVID-19, and whether or not that will change our travel abilities. So everything, we constantly have to be aware of what's going on, because emerging things change all the time. And so even though we're creating a network and a knowledge and a way of sharing, things like the coronavirus can cause us to have to do even more adaptive ecosystem management to be able to be part of a team that provides service and provides learning opportunities and works with a great group of allies across the world. And I can stop sharing now and turn it over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you both, Jacob and Kim, for your presentations. A number of just crucial points that you've both made. Now we're going to turn the audio over to Amy. If you want to go next, please.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. And I too just want to thank you, Lori, and also Marla and Cecilia for this opportunity. I'm delighted to be able to participate in this conversation. So I am the director of the Institute for Disaster Mental Health at SUNY New Paltz. And we started our engagement with Puerto Rico as a part of the New York Stands with Puerto Rico initiative that happened in summer 2018. And so I led that initiative sent 500 SUNY and CUNY students to Puerto Rico to work with NGOs on the ground in doing construction, roof repair, things like that. And I led one of those contingents. So I had 30 students, both from New Paltz and from several other SUNY and CUNY campuses with me on my trip. And to be honest, I was hesitant about that. And I was hesitant about that based on my experience. I spent a year as a Fulbright scholar at the University of Botswana in the height of the HIV epidemic, and the post-colonial nature of that and the ways that I think the West, particularly the United States, was not thoughtful about the ways in which we approached the work there, and the way that recreated colonial dynamics was really one of my biggest takeaways from that experience. So I came to this experience really hesitant about sending this giant group of New Yorkers to Puerto Rico. And I even brought that up as I was having conversations with people on the ground there when I first got there. And the response I got back was kind of like, just wait and see, just watch. And so I did, and I watched. My thinking about that actually, or my fears about that did not come to be founded. I saw it become a situation in which the students I had and the homeowners we were working with really became connected and almost became partners in some ways. And so it was a really meaningful experience for the students, and I believe it was a really meaningful experience for the homeowners as well. One story that stands out to me about that is that one of the homeowners, who was the only one left from her family who hadn't left the island, said, as she cooked a big elaborate lunch for my students, and she said, I haven't had anybody to cook for in 8 months. And so she sort of adopted my group of students as hers. And one day she got out her photo album and she started going through her photo album with the students. And my students this particular student she was showing the photo album to didn't speak a word of Spanish. And they had a conversation anyway, and it was really meaningful. So that was the launch of our work in Puerto Rico, and through that we developed relationships with numerous partners on the ground that led to the project that I currently have, which is a UNICEF USA supported project to train Puerto Rico Department of Education counselors, psychologists, and social workers in understanding disaster mental health and trauma response. And this was a post-Maria project, and I was literally at the airport and had checked my bags at JFK and was waiting for my flight when the biggest of the earthquakes hit. And so they immediately canceled the training. And, but within, 12 hours of that, my phone started ringing, and it was Marla and Cecilia, and saying, how can you help, and how soon can you guys come do some training? And I was just counting in preparation for this, we've trained, and since that day, whatever that day was, January 7th or 8th, we've trained 700 people. And that's purely a result of the partnerships that we've had through RISE and other organizations on the ground. And so I don't want to spend time repeating the importance of the partnerships piece that my peers have talked about so far, but that really is one of the biggest takeaways for us, is the importance of the on-the-ground partnerships and the importance of the on-the-ground invitation. So one of the rules I sort of set for our institute around this is that we don't go anywhere until we're invited, and unless we're invited, and we're responding to a specifically identified need on the ground from people on the ground. In terms of other lessons around, I wanted to also talk about the issue of preparation for students, and particularly around the issues of culture, which is one of the things that I personally study and spend time thinking about and writing about. And so as a disaster mental health institute, we're training undergraduate students and also graduate students. So we have an undergrad minor in disaster studies, and we have a postgraduate certificate in trauma and disaster mental health. So in both those programs, it's really important to me that people be able to think carefully about culture and context in any response. So but also there's how do you prepare them culturally to understand the culture and the context of the place they're about to respond to. And then the second question, which Jacob brought up earlier, is how do you prepare, well, both Jacob and Kim, how do you prepare them to take care of themselves? How do you, and to understand the trauma lens of the work as well. So those are kind of the issues that we are working on here right now. And we've developed a set of questions that I use to help inform what we do. And there are questions that I think that all students should be able to answer before they, or be exploring as they respond to any disaster. And those are, I'm just gonna read them to you here. How are tragedy and loss understood? How are risk and adversity faced and managed? What allows people to feel hopeful? What are acceptable reactions after a tragedy? What are acceptable ways of expressing distress? What are acceptable forms of help seeking? And what serves as just compensation? So I should add that these aren't purely my work. I'm citing Josh Miller, and I'm citing Derek Summerfield in these questions. But so that's really the frame that I've been using to help students try to think ahead of time about what the culture and the context that they're entering. And I think it's also important that they understand those questions for themselves and for the cultural background that they come from, so that if they understand their own assumptions about the answers to these questions, they'll be better able to think about them in the context of the people that they're partnering with. And so that cultural preparation is one of the big things we've been working on. The other one is around preparing themselves, like I said, for the work. And so we spent some time talking about vicarious trauma or secondary traumatic stress, and what that looks like, and how real of a phenomenon that is. And do some preparation strategies such as stress inoculation. We've been increasingly using that. It's a cognitive approach of mental rehearsal for when you're about to enter a situation that you predict will be emotionally taxing. And then finally, psychological first aid. So we've been training all of our students in psychological first aid, which is a basic approach to psychosocial support that anybody can do. You don't have to be a mental health provider to do that. And so it's helping people know what to say or how to respond if someone starts to tell you a difficult story. People aren't prepared, and people aren't prepared to hear difficult stories sometimes. Or if somebody is expressing a level of distress, it's just a basic plan for providing psychosocial support. And so those are the approaches we've been taking to prepare students, which is what I wanted to focus most on in this conversation, in addition to the partnerships piece. I think the one thing that I want to add about partnerships, maybe to sort of supplement what my colleagues have mentioned, is that I think one of the things that has been an unintentional benefit of the project that we've been doing with UNICEF USA is bringing together partners on the ground who don't typically partner with each other. And so the partners for our project, the stakeholders on the ground, are the Puerto Rico Department of Education, the University of Puerto Rico at Rio Piedras, and the Boys and Girls Clubs of Puerto Rico. And so one of the things that we've been able to do is work with University of Puerto Rico to place their graduate counseling students in Puerto Rico Department of Education schools to do their practicum in a specific trauma-informed approach that we trained them on. And that is something that had stopped happening. University of Puerto Rico was not placing any, at Rio Piedras, I should say, in the counseling program, had stopped using the schools as a site for practicum or internships just because of a lot of logistical and other challenges. And, but there's so much need in the schools, and there's, students in a graduate counseling program need 700 hours of direct service as a part of their training. And so the opportunity there to reconnect them to each other with us as sort of a bridge there has been an unintended benefit that I hope we can continue to foster as we move along. So I think those are the things that I wanted to highlight. So I want to make sure that we leave time for Jorge as well. So thank you, everybody.
All right. Yeah, good morning, everybody. So thank you, Lori, and also Marla and Cecilia for inviting me here. And thank you for all the three previous speakers. So a minor clarification, I'm actually a professor of mechanical engineering, so I think it's close enough. So what I'd like to share with you all today is our assessment of the damage in the earthquakes and how that assessment may open opportunities for academic collaborations. I was actually arriving the day of the big earthquake because of an ongoing collaboration with the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau that is in part sponsored by the NSF CRIS program. And I had to return back 2 days after, and the City University of New York asked me to coordinate a response to support the earthquakes. We went back about 10 days after that. There was, of course, still some of the earthquakes still going on. So we assembled a group of experts following the call by RISE. And the call required expertise
Jorge, this is Lori Peak, and I think we just lost your sound.
plug here. Okay.
Oh, there. Yes, Jorge. I'm so
Okay.
sorry. Something just happened, and you cut out for a moment.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank
No,
you.
very
Thank
good.
you. You
So
sound
maybe,
great, though.
all right. So maybe I don't know where we left, but the point was that we organized a group of colleagues from civil engineering from a few campuses across the City University of New York, including City College. But the call was initially to provide expertise on assessing those private properties. That created some conflict when we arrived there. We coordinated the visit with the School of Architecture. So that was our very first lesson learned, that there was quite a bit of resistance by the local authorities to have volunteers, even though we were qualified to inspect properties. So we had to learn on the ground immediately and adapt to our mission. In large part, it was the notion of some authorities looking for perhaps some technical validation that the property couldn't be used, and it could have to be demolished. So that was one of the claims from the some of the groups there. So we decided not to be into participate on that discussion and focus more on overall assessment of the damages and exploring how can the university best support in the long term. So this was an experience that we had to keep in mind that in some aspects when this implies some legal implications, the range of stakeholders is bigger than the academic environment can support. So with that in mind, we refocused the efforts and we inspected the entire historical district of Ponce. This is in coordination with the School of Architecture of the Catholic University and also with the Puerto Rico Culture Institute, I think it is called. So we had the director there, the leadership of that institute, and the lessons learned from that exercise were just amazing. It was just so much history that is at risk. And there was this sense about trying to rescue every single building. So we had to inform them that there may have to be some compromises in terms of letting some buildings go because they couldn't be rescued no matter how much effort it could be. And perhaps one way that university could support on that was to provide technical expertise to make that decision process more informed. Those are painful decisions that the island will have to do. And perhaps that's one area where universities can collaborate in providing that additional expertise to make informed decisions of the reconstruction, particularly in that aspect of the historical district of Ponce. Tied to that is the economic loss in the area. So we have made a recommendation that we need socioeconomics experts to explore ways where the affected areas could minimize economic loss due to perhaps tourism. And that was the case of the Ponce Boardwalk, which is a vibrant commercial venue that pretty much got shut down entirely. The damage in the area is significant, and it will require tremendous efforts to restore that area. So our estimate was in the millions of dollars per week. There was not a single commerce open when we inspected. The damage in that region was a little bit different. It was a combination of perhaps a multi-hazard from Hurricane Maria erosion and the earthquake, where the soil has some problem of compaction. It's called solidification or liquation of the soil. So that opened the entire ground, and all the properties along that line of the boardwalk were affected, all the way to the Ponce Port, which is further east, walking distance from the boardwalk in that region. So in that case, the expertise required is more about soil geologists more than structural engineers. So that's a potential area of support in the midst of the earthquakes. Two more points. We move further west to visit the the affected towns in the Southwest, and that was in coordination with the National Guard. They actually escorted us throughout the town to do the inspection, and that coordination came through thanks to the Catholic School of in Ponce, the School of Architecture. And in that visit, the findings were interesting and fascinating in the sense that there was clear evidence, as we documented, of mispractices in design and also in construction. So the pattern was very common. There's some effects, how it's called the short beam problem, and that was the main cause of the school that collapsed. And that pattern was all across. We concluded in our internal report to CUNY that, in our best opinion, every single one of those properties should not have been affected if they have been properly designed and built. And there was no clear distinction in terms of the socioeconomics of the people impacted. They were from all kind of economic levels, meaning there were some very expensive properties that had the same challenge. And so they were actually designed and built following those mispractices. So we were surprised by that because the island has a very good schools of engineering, about 2 or 3 in the island. So how that practice prevailed over years. And so that is another area of opportunity to collaborate along with the local universities to retrain the engineers, architects, and also the builders. So those practices are eliminated from the culture of design and building. So that gave us a sort of an opportunity to have an outside view of this, and we did it with the highest possible respect to the colleagues there, but there were some clear signs, so that was very well documented all across. So overall, CUNY is now organizing a more comprehensive effort to support working with the local universities in these areas that at the same time we believe will provide some very unique opportunities for our students in a range of disciplines, including architecture, engineering, even socioeconomics. So one particular initiative that we're currently exploring is to support a long-term restoration of the District of Ponce, working closely with the Catholic University and the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, in terms of exploring best practices to reconstruct for long-term, taking in consideration the challenges that historical buildings bring in, and perhaps bring new ideas that could be implemented in the island and maybe likely in other islands across the Caribbean. So, Laura, we'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Jorge and Amy, Kim, and Jacob. This has just been an absolutely fascinating set of presentations, and we are so grateful for the time, effort, thought, and care that each one of you have put into these extraordinary projects. And we have a few minutes remaining before we need to begin the wrap up for some Q&A. So I saw one question that came in already from Nancy Ferguson, who would really like to know what are the ethics of bringing students who don't have at least some level of Spanish to Puerto Rico? And she asked, doesn't that add to the burden on the local community? So can anyone on the forum, Amy or Kim or Jacob or Jorge, can you speak to how you thought about both Spanish speaking and non-Spanish speaking students or colleagues that you brought into the field?
I can start. This is Amy. When we took the students in the summer of 2018 to do the rebuilding work, we had a pool of applicants to choose from, and for my group, I did choose every Spanish-speaking student that was available who had applied, but still had extra spaces. And so I did take non-Spanish-speaking students. And part of my reasoning for that was that, you know, the rebuilding work itself didn't necessarily require Spanish. And I think it was a good, for those students specifically, I think it was a good experience to be not in the majority in that way and to have to struggle with that. However, if I'm doing training around mental health, or if I'm doing any sort of mental health related work, I would not take anybody who doesn't speak Spanish. That's been a limit that I've put on that work because it's so much more interpersonally focused, and I do think that it does add to the burden. So that's how I've been thinking about that anyway.
This is Jacob. I can also speak to it. The first year that we went, we had several students who spoke Spanish. The last year that we went, we only had one student who spoke Spanish. And I would agree, it's definitely much more difficult. We've been working to kind of deal with that by working with Marlon Cecilio and our partners to make sure that we have local liaisons who kind of go with us where we're going, and we obviously pay those local liaisons. I think, you know, we have a lot of students at the University of Minnesota who are very interested in helping out, and I think that there are limitations based off of whether you do or don't speak Spanish, and it's up to the people who are organizing and leading to make sure that you're kind of not putting people who are, you know, trying to communicate around delicate situations. If they don't understand the language, that wouldn't be appropriate. But I think that you can also leverage quite a bit local partnerships and work with students who can help you translate to still do good work, even if you have students who don't speak the language. Maybe they'll get interested in doing the work and continue and learn the language, which I think would be fantastic. So I agree, it's much more difficult, but I think if you're careful about the situations that you're putting students in, and you're working with local translators to help you understand the context and work in those situations, that you can do it.
Thanks. Jorge, we have one really quick question for you, and then I'll do the wrap up. Kamiko Link wanted to know if you are coordinating with NIST, and probably particularly their disaster failure studies program, which is conducting the comprehensive review of buildings and why they failed.
Yeah, we initially did not coordinate with them. Once we got there, following up, we had shared our findings with the organization, and there have been some cross conversation. Mostly my colleagues that are more expert than I in the field. So, and there has been some interesting validation and also expansion of the finding when we combine both. So I believe they are going to incorporate our observations in the report.
Wonderful. And Kamiko, I think that question that you ask here sort of is a perfect segue out of this wonderful forum, which we hope is the beginning of many ongoing conversations, which is really about how do we do this? How do we coordinate better together? I think the panelists today had some extraordinarily insightful comments about coordination, the importance of local partnerships, about how we do trauma-informed work, and also how we develop deep cultural competence and respect as we're moving in and out of various sites. And so with that, I really want to again thank all of the panelists, thank all of you who logged on to this forum today. Thank you for your time. We also want to thank the National Science Foundation Program on Humans, Disasters, and the Built Environment for the funding support, and to thank the RISE Network for the partnership in bringing together Jacob, Jorge, Amy, and Kim for this conversation. We know that we weren't able to get to all of the questions and the resource requests that we received via chat and Q&A. So the wonderful Katie Murphy at the Natural Hazard Center will be sharing those questions and the responses, and we'll be posting those on the CONVERGE website, where we will post the video recording as well as any slides from this meeting today at converge.colorado.edu/communications. If you have questions, we hope you will contact us at converge@colorado.edu. And please remember that we have free online training modules and other resources available through the CONVERGE website to help to further this important process of empowering our various communities. And so with that, I hope you will all join me in a warm virtual thank you to our panelists, to Marla and Cecilio, for their partnership and leadership. And please remember to sign up for updates and resources at converge.colorado.edu/sign up. Everyone, please have a beautiful day, and remember to please take care of yourself and others. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.